She took everything my dying father saved for me, while he was still in his hospital bed. So I walked away. No calls. No letters. Nothing. Now, years later, she's at my door, begging for help. The beeping of the heart monitor didn't comfort me. It was too consistent. Too clean. A reminder that machines still worked even when bodies didn't. Outside the window, the city carried on as if it didn't know a man was dying on the 8th floor. Cars moved like lifelines along the freeway. Horns flared, and sirens cried in the distance. But in this room, time had narrowed into a single breath. My father was that breath. Thin, quiet, labored. I sat by his side, still in my office clothes. Tie half undone, shoes wet from the storm earlier that day. I hadn't meant to stay this long. The nurse told me this morning he had a few more days, maybe more. But something about the way he looked tonight. Sunken eyes, shallow skin, the way he clutched at the air like he was reaching for someone just out of view. It told me I shouldn't leave. The light above flickered once. I watched it, grateful for something else to focus on. Anything other than watching the strongest man I knew become this. He hadn't spoken in hours, just short exhales. But then his hand twitched twice and I leaned in. He turned his head slowly, and for a second, I saw a glimmer of recognition. His mouth opened. "Dad," he coughed. The sound of a dying man's lungs is something no one prepares you for. It's soft, almost apologetic, like the body is embarrassed to be falling apart. I held his hand tighter. His voice cracked, no louder than a whisper. "She took it." My brows pulled together. "What?" I asked gently. He wet his lips. "The money is gone." Your mother." It didn't make sense. I thought maybe he was confused, hallucinating. But his grip tightened with surprising strength. "Everything I saved. For you." She emptied it. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that screams in your ears. My heart thudded, but I kept my face still. I didn't want to upset him. I wanted to believe I'd misheard. But I knew I hadn't. Because I saw it in his eyes, the urgency, the shame, the defeat. I wanted to ask a dozen things. When? How? Why didn't you stop her? But he was fading. He breathed once more. Then again. And then, nothing. No gasp. No drama. Just stillness. The kind of stillness that ends decades in a second. I stared at him. My brain didn't know what to do. The monitor flatlined. But I didn't need a machine to tell me he was gone. I felt it. I felt the room hollow out. It wasn't just grief. It was betrayal. He was supposed to go in peace. Instead, he went in pain. And not the physical kind. The nurse came in. Her face softened when she saw me. She pressed the alarm, walked to his side, checked for a pulse even though she didn't need to. It was just routine. She whispered something. I don't remember what. She handed me tissues. I didn't take them. Instead, I leaned forward and kissed my father's forehead, like I had as a boy. He was still warm. And then I whispered something back. I know, Dad. I'll find out everything. I walked out of that room a different person. I don't remember much of what happened next. Signing forms. Numb hands holding a pen that felt too heavy. Someone asking if I wanted to call anyone. I said no. I didn't want to hear her voice. Not yet. The taxi ride home was quiet. Too quiet. The driver asked if I wanted music. I said no. What I really wanted was a different life. One where my father didn't die thinking he'd failed me. One where my mother didn't confirm his worst fear. I got home and poured a drink. Something I hadn't done in months. The scotch burned my throat, but I welcomed it. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall. I kept hearing his voice. She took it. Everything I saved. I opened my laptop. I logged into the online banking portal I helped Dad set up 2 years ago when he started forgetting his password. It was there. His savings account. Once nearly 6 figures. Balance. $64.11. I stared at the screen. My hands didn't move. My mouth felt dry. Gone. Everything. Gone. I clicked through the statements. The withdrawals weren't spaced out. They came in 3 heavy hits, all within 1 month. Starting 2 weeks before he went into the hospital. all labeled as transfer to joint account. Her name. No reason. No explanation. Just silence. Except for the date. I recognized the day. It was the same day she called me and told me, "Your father's resting. He doesn't need any stress. Maybe don't visit this week." She knew. She knew what she was doing. But here's the worst part. I didn't confront her right away. I sat with it. I let it rot inside me. I kept going through the motions of funeral arrangements, making calls, choosing flowers, signing forms, organizing the wake. And she played the role flawlessly. She cried at the right times, wore all black, clutched my arm as if she'd lost the love of her life. Every guest whispered about how strong she was, how graceful, how deeply in love she must have been. I stood beside her like a statue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear off the mask and show them who she really was. But I waited, because I knew one thing. If she could steal from a dying man, she could lie with a straight face. And I wasn't going to accuse her in public without proof. Not yet. So I waited. And every second I did, the fire inside me burned brighter. She was always the one people admired. That's the part that's hardest to explain. To anyone outside our house, my mother was the image of selflessness. Grace in motion. She could charm entire rooms with a smile and have strangers opening up like she'd known them for years. The pastor at our church once said, "There are people God sends to comfort the broken. Your mother is one of them." I remember hearing that as a teenager and thinking, maybe he's right. Maybe I'm the broken one. Because at home, she was different. It wasn't fists. It wasn't yelling. It was silence. Control. Quiet guilt dripped like water torture. If I failed a test, she wouldn't scold me. She'd sigh and say, "I guess I was wrong to believe you were better than that." If I didn't want to visit my grandparents with her, she'd whisper to Dad just loud enough for me to hear, "I don't know what I did to raise a child so selfish." When I got accepted into college, she told the neighbors before she told me congratulations. "It's all the discipline I gave him," she said proudly, as if I were a recipe she'd perfected. I think that's when I learned what it meant to be loved conditionally. Growing up, I watched how people responded to her, how they believed her version of every story, every drama, every moment of pain. Like that one Thanksgiving when my uncle dared to joke that maybe Mom should let someone else host for once. She laughed it off in public, but when the dishes were done and the guests had left, she cried in the kitchen for an hour, accusing my father of not defending her honor. And he, tired, soft-spoken, and worn down by years of keeping peace, just nodded and apologized. I saw it even then. She wore pain like armor. She weaponized fragility. The victimhood wasn't an accident. It was how she survived. And manipulated. And won. There was a moment, I think I was 9, when I first caught the inconsistency. Dad had forgotten their anniversary. Completely. Not even a card. I thought we were doomed. I braced for the guilt parade. Instead, she smiled, said it was fine, and told me, "When you love someone, you forgive quickly." That night, after Dad went to bed, I saw her tear a photo of their wedding in half and flush it down the toilet. No yelling, just strategy. The performance never stopped, even when no one was watching. At school, my friends would say, "Your mom's so cool. She gives out full-sized candy bars on Halloween." At church, "Your mom is a saint. She helped with every fundraiser." Even the teachers, "You're lucky. So many kids don't have mothers who are this involved." And I believed them for a while, because when enough people repeat something, it begins to sound like truth, even when it doesn't feel like it. But it's hard to unsee what you know. And I knew the difference between the voice she used in public and the one she used when we were alone. When I was 16, I stayed out past curfew. Not intentionally, my phone had died, and I lost track of time. When I got home, she was sitting at the kitchen table, the lights off except for the one above her. She wasn't angry. She didn't yell. She simply stood, looked me in the eye, and said, "I prayed for you not to be dead tonight, but maybe it would have hurt less than wondering if you even care." And she walked away. I didn't leave the house for 2 weeks after that. I apologized. I brought her flowers. I made dinner. I did everything to get her to smile again. And when she finally did, I remember the overwhelming sense of relief, like I'd been granted permission to exist again. Looking back now, I realize how many years I mistook survival for love. So when my father died, and the money vanished, and the story began to unravel, something else unraveled in me. Not just anger, clarity. I started replaying every memory, but this time with context. I stopped editing out the red flags. I let the pain come back unfiltered. And I saw her, not the saint, not the smiling woman from church, not the hostess with the perfect pie crusts and the polite small talk, but the architect, the one who built a narrative that kept her on top, no matter who paid the price. After the funeral, everyone swarmed her, hugged her, told her how strong she was, how much Dad had adored her, how unfair life was. She nodded graciously, wiped fake tears, let herself be comforted while I stood in the corner, gripping the knowledge of what she had done like a blade. People kept asking me, "Are you okay?" And I wanted to say, "No, I'm not okay, because she's not who you think she is." But instead, I smiled. I played my part, just like Dad used to, because sometimes survival runs in families. Still, the mask slips. Eventually. And for her, it did when I asked her about the money. We were alone in the dining room. Everyone else had gone to bed. She was washing dishes in her usual slow, methodical rhythm. I leaned against the counter and asked, carefully, "Did you take Dad's savings?" She didn't turn around, didn't answer. I asked again, this time softer. "He told me, before he passed. He said you emptied it." This time, she looked over her shoulder, expression blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said flatly. I stared at her. And then, she turned off the faucet, dried her hands, and said something that made my stomach turn. "He was barely conscious. You really believe he was thinking straight?" And there it was. The lie, the deflection, the slow pee. She walked past me without another word. I stood there, heart pounding, knowing what I had to do. This wasn't just grief. It was manipulation. Even now. Even after death. And I knew if I didn't walk away soon, I'd drown in it too. When I was young, I didn't realize how often my father gave things up. He never talked about it. Never complained. He just stepped aside. If Mom wanted the last word, he gave it. If I wanted a toy we couldn't afford, somehow it showed up. If dinner was short, his portion always looked smaller than ours. But when you grow up in a house where one person takes up all the oxygen, you don't notice who's suffocating. My father was not a loud man. He was steady. While Mom commanded the room with her voice, Dad had a presence you only noticed when it was gone. Like the hum of a refrigerator or the ticking of a clock. Silent, dependable, constant. He worked as an electrician. For 32 years. Same company, same hours, same calloused hands. He'd leave before sunrise and come back covered in dust, the scent of copper and sweat lingering on his clothes. I remember the sound of his boots dropping at the front door. I'd hear them and feel safe again. That was my father. The one who worked so I could go to school. The one who stayed late on weekends because overtime meant groceries. The one who, without ever saying it out loud, gave me everything he didn't have growing up. But there were things he didn't give me. Things I now understand were missing. He never pulled me aside to talk about women, or family, or how to stand your ground in the face of someone who says they love you, but only when you play the part they wrote for you. And now, looking back, I know why. Because he was still learning those things too. There was a moment when I was 11. Mom had gone out with her church friends, and Dad was making pancakes for dinner. A rare treat. We were laughing about something. I can't remember what. And I asked him, "Dad, how come you never get mad?" He paused, flipped a pancake, and said, "Because someone has to stay calm. Otherwise, the house cracks." I didn't know what he meant then, but I do now. He wasn't being calm. He was holding everything together with invisible thread. What I didn't know at the time, and what I only discovered after his death, was that Dad had been saving for years. Quietly, methodically, He had set up a separate account in my name. Started it when I was 15. Never told me. It was meant to be a surprise for after college. A foundation. A fresh start. I found the paperwork in a locked drawer after the funeral. It was in an old manila folder labeled simply, "For him." Inside were years of printed statements. Contributions every month. Sometimes just $50. Sometimes more. But always something. There was a note, written in his uneven handwriting. "I didn't know how to protect you from everything. But maybe this will help you choose something better when I'm gone." I read it a dozen times. My chest hurt in a way I can't describe. Not grief. Not anger. Shame. Because I had spent so much time focused on her. The storm. That I didn't see the man who'd been quietly boarding the windows behind me. The account had once held over $90,000. Gone in 3 transactions. The withdrawals were clean, clinical. No messy paper trail. Just an online transfer to a joint account that had only ever been used for utilities. He didn't even know she had access. Or maybe he did. Maybe he gave her that access years ago, thinking love meant trust. Maybe he thought she'd never use it. Or maybe, like so many things, he knew and stayed silent. Because if he confronted her, the house might crack. I went to the bank in person just to be sure. I asked for records. Spoke to the branch manager. He remembered my dad. Said he came in once a month. Quiet, polite, always cash deposits. Never asked for advice, never missed a beat. The manager looked at me and said, "Your dad was one of the last gentlemen left." I nodded, thanked him, and left the building with the confirmation I didn't want. She took it. Not just the money. She took his peace. His legacy. The only thing he'd built that didn't involve wires and outlets. And still, part of me kept wondering, why didn't he say anything sooner? Why wait until his final breath to tell me the truth? Why let her hold the power until the end? It haunted me, until one night, weeks later, I sat in his old chair in the garage, his sanctuary, and I found the answer. In a dusty box tucked beneath his workbench was an old audio recorder. I hit play without thinking, and I heard his voice. A journal entry. Just one. Dated 6 months before he died. "I don't want him to hate her. I don't want him to carry that. But he'll need to know one day, when I'm not here to shield it anymore. He'll need to see her clearly, and choose his own way. I saved this money not to fix him, but to free him." I sat in that garage for a long time. The air smelled like oil and pine wood. His old flannel jacket still hung on the wall. And I understood, finally, my father's quiet sacrifice wasn't just money. It was bearing the weight of 2 people so that I could walk out lighter. He knew she would destroy it. He just hoped I wouldn't destroy myself trying to stop her. When I stood to leave the garage, I took the recorder with me. And I made a vow that whatever happened next, I wouldn't let her twist his memory. I wouldn't play nice anymore. And I wouldn't let anyone think she deserved to mourn a man she spent her life undermining. The confrontation didn't happen the way I'd imagined. There was no dramatic shouting match. No tears. No thrown glass or slammed doors. That's not how things worked in our family. We didn't explode. We imploded quietly, destructively, like old buildings being demolished from the inside. It was the night after the wake. Everyone had gone home. The fridge was stuffed with leftover casseroles and sympathy lasagnas. My shirt still smelled like church flowers and cheap cologne from well-meaning handshakes. I should have gone to bed, but I didn't. Instead, I walked into the dining room. My father's chair still tucked in neatly at the head of the table, and found her standing by the window, glass of wine in hand, staring into the dark. She looked so small. But I'd learned by now. Small doesn't mean harmless. "I saw the bank records," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. She didn't move. "I know you took it. All of it. The money Dad saved for me." Still nothing. Then slowly she turned around. Her face was unreadable. Not surprised. Not guilty. Just flat. Her voice came soft. Controlled. "I was managing the household. He didn't tell you that." That's when I felt it. Rage, not hot, but cold. Focused. Clear. "He told me," I said, "right before he died." She flinched just slightly. He didn't know what he was saying. He was confused, on medication. You can't seriously. He was lucid. I snapped. He looked me in the eye and told me you took everything. Silence. She took a sip of wine and stared at me over the rim of the glass. Then she said the line I will never forget. He was going to die. What did he need it for? The room went quiet in a new way. Not just absent of sound, absent of humanity. I looked at her like I was seeing a stranger. A woman who had once cradled me in her arms and read me bedtime stories. A woman who had smiled in family photos and said she loved us. And now she was standing there justifying theft. From a dying man. Her own husband. My father. I didn't say anything at first. I just walked to the drawer in the buffet cabinet. The one that held our family records, insurance forms, receipts from decades back, and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. I opened it and laid down every page on the dining table. Bank statements, transaction histories, dates, the photo of Dad's handwritten letter. For him. Her eyes scanned it briefly. Then she looked up and said, "He wasn't perfect, you know? It wasn't an argument. It was a diversion. The oldest trick in her book. But I wasn't a child anymore." I leaned forward, both palms on the table. "You stole from a dying man. From your own son. Don't twist this. Don't spin it. Own it." She stepped back, as if the table itself had turned hostile. Then, for the first time since Dad died, her voice cracked. "I was scared, okay? I didn't know how to survive without him. I thought maybe I deserved something after everything I gave up." Her hands trembled. Her eyes glistened. And for a moment the years fell away, and she looked like someone I used to love. But then she added, "And don't act like you were entitled to it. That money was never yours." And just like that, the door in my chest slammed shut. She had done it again. Turned a confession into a justification. A betrayal into a balance sheet. A lifelong act of sabotage into something I should feel guilty about. My voice came out quiet, cold. "You were never scared. You were entitled. You've always been." She tried to interrupt, but I didn't let her. "You made Dad feel small for years. And when he was finally free enough to do something for me, without asking your permission, you took it." My breath caught. "You took the only thing he tried to give me without your fingerprints on it." She sat down. And for the first time, she didn't argue. She just stared at the table. I thought I would feel relief, but I didn't. I felt grief again. Fresh all over again. Not because she didn't fight back, but because she didn't even understand. There was no apology. Just a woman calculating her next move. And I saw clearly now what Dad had endured for decades. The next day was the final service. Private family-only graveside moment. She showed up in all black, of course. Veil. Gloves. Silent tears. I kept my distance. And when the pastor asked if anyone wanted to say something, I stepped forward. And I spoke. Not about her, not about what had been lost, but about him. About the quiet love of a man who gave without asking for praise. About the lessons he taught by example. Kindness, resilience, restraint. And at the end, I added just one sentence. And he spent his life protecting others from pain, even if it meant swallowing his own. I didn't look at her when I said it. I didn't need to. I saw her flinch out of the corner of my eye. And I knew. It had landed. That night, I sent her a message. No anger. No threats. Just the truth. We are done. Not out of hate, but out of survival. Dad deserved better. And so do I. She never replied. But in the weeks that followed, I heard from the cousins. The aunts. The family friends. They said I was being cruel. That grief makes people do desperate things. That she's still your mother. And every time they said it, I wanted to scream. Where were you when he was disappearing? When she was draining him dry? When I was trying to hold the truth in my hands like it wasn't breaking me? But I didn't scream. Because I'd already said the only thing that mattered. Goodbye. The first year after I cut her off felt like waking up underwater. Nothing was loud. Nothing was sharp. Just muffled grief, slow days, and a kind of loneliness that doesn't look dramatic on the outside, but swells quietly in your chest, taking up more space than you ever expect. I didn't tell anyone the full story. Not at work. Not to friends. Not even to my therapist, not at first. Because how do you explain that your mother isn't dead? But you grieve her anyway. The money was gone, yes. But it wasn't just the money I had to live without. It was the idea of having someone to call when the day fell apart. Someone to send a photo to. Someone to say, "I'm proud of you," even if they didn't mean it. I didn't realize how much I'd built my emotional framework around hoping she'd change, until I gave up hoping. And when I finally stopped waiting for an apology that would never come, something broke. But something else quietly healed. I moved out of the house 2 months after the funeral. The one I grew up in felt haunted. Not by ghosts but by echoes. Every corner reminded me of who I had to be in her presence. Every hallway carried the whisper of what wasn't said. I packed up alone. No farewell party. No send-off. I left behind the piano she used to play on Sunday mornings. The kitchen table where she once told me I was the best accident that ever happened. The drawer of birthday cards she never mailed, but always showed to neighbors, like proof of her motherly devotion. I left it all, and I started over. The apartment I moved into wasn't much. 2nd floor, thin walls, a leaky faucet that gurgled like it had something to confess. But it was mine. No passive-aggressive sticky notes on the fridge. No dinner conversations where silence said more than words. Just me. And silence, the kind that doesn't punish you. The kind that asks, "What do you want to be now?" I picked up freelance work. Wrote more. Took on side jobs. I struggled financially, of course I did. That money my father saved could have paid for grad school or a down payment or just a few years without counting every dollar. But I also learned something sacred. There's a certain pride that grows in you when you carry your own weight. A quiet kind of confidence that doesn't shout, but shows up in the way you breathe easier at night. People asked about her from time to time. "How's your mom holding up? You must miss her, right?" I'd smile politely, nod, shrug, change the subject. Not because I didn't have answers, but because I didn't know anyone the version of the story they expected to hear. The letters started coming that Christmas. The first was handwritten. A card with snowflakes and doves. Her cursive still elegant, like always. Inside just one sentence. "Wherever you are, I love you." I didn't open it the first time I saw it. I just stared at the envelope. It wasn't guilt I felt. It wasn't warmth either. It was pressure. Like she had knocked without asking if she was still welcome. I put the envelope in a drawer. Unopened. The next year another letter came. This one said more. Told me about how the house felt quiet without me. How she missed my laugh. How no one cooked the mashed potatoes right at Thanksgiving anymore. She didn't mention the money. Or Dad. Or anything real. Just nostalgia. A selective scrapbook of a past that had never actually existed. I didn't reply, but I didn't throw them away either. Every year the letters kept coming. Same envelope. Same return address. Different words. But always the same message under the surface. "Let me back in. I'll pretend nothing happened if you will too." And for a while I almost believed I could. That maybe, if enough time passed, it wouldn't hurt to hear her voice again. But every time I stood at the mailbox, her handwriting staring back at me like a question I didn't ask, I felt the ache come back. Because forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And some doors, once shut, need to stay locked for a while. Not out of hate, but out of survival. I still had Dad's voice recording. I played it sometimes, late at night when the loneliness got too loud. He never said my name. Never mentioned her. Just a few quiet minutes of reflection from a man who spent his life holding back storms. And every time I listened, I remembered what he said. He'll need to choose his own way. I was choosing, every day, choosing to stay silent, choosing peace over reconciliation, choosing myself. And yet, beneath it all, I wondered, what if she really is alone now? What if she's older, sicker, different? What if the years have stripped away her arrogance and left only the raw bones of regret? And would it even matter? Would it change what she did? Would it undo the nights I cried into a pillow because I felt like loving her meant losing myself? I didn't have answers, but I knew this. Some silences aren't punishment. They're protection. Then one day, 4 years after the funeral, there was no letter, just a knock. It had been 4 years. 4 years of silence. 4 years of unopened letters. 4 years of building a life without the woman who gave me mine. And then one Sunday morning, I heard it. A knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just steady. 2 taps. Then 1. I waited, frozen. Because some sounds you recognize without ever expecting them again. I opened the door slowly, and there she was. My mother. Smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Her hair streaked with more silver than I thought possible. She was wearing a cardigan I hadn't seen in years. One my father used to tease her about, saying she looked like an off-duty librarian. She smiled. But it wasn't her old smile. Not the one she used on neighbors or strangers or church members. This one was quieter, like it knew it didn't belong. "Hi," she said. I didn't respond. She looked past me, into the apartment behind me, as if trying to gauge how much of my life she'd missed just by the furniture. Then her eyes came back to mine. "I didn't know if you still lived here." I said nothing. She nodded once, acknowledging the wall between us. Then, after a pause, "Can I come in?" I stood there for a long second. The kind of second that carries the weight of years. And then I stepped aside. She sat on the edge of my couch like it might collapse beneath her. Her eyes scanned the room. My shelves, my books, the empty mug on the coffee table, as if memorizing a foreign country. I sat across from her, my hands folded, guarded. She cleared her throat. "You look healthy." I nodded. "You look different." She smiled again, this time almost embarrassed. "Time does that." I wanted to ask, to your body or to your conscience? But I didn't. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Why are you here?" She exhaled. A long, tired breath. The kind you take before surgery. Or confession. "I've lost the house," she said quietly. "The bills, the insurance. I didn't plan well. I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sympathy. Just the cold clarity of recognition. Of course she hadn't planned well. She never had. She just moved forward assuming someone would clean up the mess. "I thought maybe you could help. Just for a little while." Her voice cracked. Not with sorrow but calculation. The same old piano key just played softer. I leaned forward. "Help with what?" She looked down. "Money. Rent. I'm staying with a friend. But it's not forever." I said nothing. "Just until I can find something more stable." I studied her. The lines in her face were deeper now. Her eyes didn't shine like they used to. She looked like someone who had finally run out of stories to sell. And still, she never said the words. Never said, "I'm sorry." Never said, "I took what wasn't mine." Never said, "I lied to you and to your father and to myself." She just said, "I need help." I stood and walked into the kitchen, opened a drawer, pulled out the stack of letters. Every Christmas, every birthday, every attempt to get back in. I brought them into the room and dropped them on the table between us. She looked at them like they might bite her. "You've read them?" "No," I said, "but I kept them." "That's more than you deserved." She looked away. I sat down again. My voice came quiet, level. "You stole from Dad. You watched him die and you took everything he worked for. You watched me struggle. You watched me disappear. And still, not once. Not in these letters, not in this room, have you said you're sorry." Tears welled in her eyes. But I didn't move. Because I knew her tears. I'd grown up inside them. They were mirrors, meant to reflect your guilt back at you. "I know I wasn't the mother you needed," she finally whispered. "I don't want a version of you," I said. "I just want the truth." She looked up. Her lip trembled. I was angry. At him. At you. At how everything turned out. I wanted control. And when he started hiding things, saving for you, making decisions without me, I panicked. Her voice was shaking now. "I thought, if I couldn't have him, I could at least have what he left behind. That was the closest thing to honesty I had ever heard from her. And it hit harder than I expected. Because it was selfish, small, ugly, and real. She wiped her eyes. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm tired. And I don't know where else to go. I nodded slowly. Then I stood, walked to my desk, and wrote a check. Nothing big. Nothing extravagant. Just enough for rent, food, a quiet place to breathe. I handed it to her. She took it with both hands, trembling. This doesn't mean we're okay, I said. She nodded. This doesn't mean I trust you. Again she nodded. It just means I'm not you. And with that I walked to the door, opened it. She stood, stared at me like she wanted to say something. But she didn't. She just stepped outside. And I closed the door behind her. Not in anger, not in triumph, but in peace. After she left, the silence came back. But it wasn't the same silence from 4 years ago. The heavy, choking stillness that clung to my skin like damp cloth. This one was lighter, not soft but honest. A silence I had chosen. I stood at the door for a long time after it closed. I didn't move, didn't reach for the check stub still on the table, didn't sit down. I just stood there breathing, not with pride, not with bitterness, but with a kind of quiet that comes only when you've finally done the hard thing and lived. Later that night, I found myself in the garage again. Not hers, not his, mine. It smelled of varnish and oil and memories I had earned on my own. There were no photographs on the walls, no relics of a family story I no longer wanted to keep rewriting. Just tools, a workbench, a coffee mug with a chipped handle, and a small wooden box that held the recorder. I turned it on and listened to my father's voice. Again. If you're hearing this, it means you made it through. I never wanted to make you pick sides. That was never the point. But I hope you understand by now. You can love someone from a distance, and you can protect someone by letting go. His voice was softer now, worn by time and breath and unsaid things. I forgave her long before she asked, not because she deserved it, but because I didn't want her to own my peace too. You'll have to choose your own way, son, but let it be yours, not hers, not mine, yours. I turned off the recording, and I wept, not for him, not for her, but for the boy I used to be, the one who bent himself into quiet shapes to survive, the one who confused survival for love. The one who thought strength meant silence, and silence meant safety. That boy was gone now, and I, who stood in his place, was no longer afraid of the sound of my own breath. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote, not for work, not for distraction, just for me, and the words came like a flood. I wrote about control, about manipulation dressed as love, about how generational wounds don't heal just by pretending they didn't bleed. And then I wrote about mercy, the kind that doesn't excuse, the kind that doesn't forget, the kind that doesn't need applause. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. I didn't send more money, because I had made a decision, and not in the heat of pain or resentment. In clarity, she would not live in my life anymore, but she would live in my story, as a caution, as a lesson, as a chapter one no longer needed to rewrite because I finally understood how it ended. I opened the window that afternoon, let the air in. It was cold, crisp, the kind of cold that wakes you up without hurting. I took a walk for the first time in weeks, past the corner cafe, the bookstore I used to avoid because it reminded me of the ones she loved, the bench where I once read my father's note, fingers trembling. Everything looked the same. But I was different. When I got back to the apartment, I took the letters out of the drawer. All of them. I didn't tear them up. I didn't burn them. I simply read the first one, wherever you are, I love you, and placed it in the box beside the recorder. Not to remember her, but to remember what I overcame. People ask me now, sometimes quietly, sometimes carelessly, if I ever made peace with my mother, and I always say the same thing, yes. But she didn't get to be a part of it. Because peace isn't always a shared experience. Sometimes it's a solo journey. Sometimes the only way to reclaim yourself is to walk away from the people who taught you how to disappear. I still think of my father. Every day. But not in pain anymore. Now, when I remember him, it's in the little things. The way I fold my shirts. The way I fix a socket without calling a repairman. The way I hold silence, not as a prison but as a pause. He didn't teach me how to hate her. He taught me how to outgrow her. And that, more than anything, is the inheritance I carry. Forgiveness is a word people throw around like confetti at a party they didn't plan to clean up after. Forgive and forget. You'll feel better if you just let it go. She's still your mother. I used to nod when people said those things. I used to pretend they were right. But they weren't. Because forgiveness, real forgiveness, doesn't look the way we're taught it should. It's not warm. It's not instant. And it's not a magic spell that makes the past disappear. It's something quieter. Something slower. Something earned. Not by the person who hurt you, but by the person you're trying to become. For a long time, I thought forgiving her meant I had to let her back in. That I had to pretend what she did wasn't theft. That I had to act like her lies didn't break something that would never fully mend. But that's not what forgiveness is. Forgiveness isn't an invitation. It's a release. A decision not to carry someone else's shame on your back for another day. A decision to stop building your identity around the wounds they left behind. A decision to let them exist, flawed, broken, distant, without letting their story dictate your future. I didn't forgive her to make her feel better. I forgave her because I refused to let her own even one more inch of my peace. I forgave her because hate is heavy, and grief is sharp, and I had already spent enough of my life bleeding for someone who never once handed me a bandage. Some people get apologies. Some people get the moment, the tearful confession, the hug, the reconciliation scene we see in movies. I didn't, and I never will, but I still got closure. I gave it to myself. I live in a small house now. It's nothing big. 2 bedrooms. One for me, one that holds old books and late-night thoughts. The walls are filled with things I chose. Art I found at flea markets. Notes I wrote to myself on tired days. A photo of my father, him smiling, not sick, sitting on my nightstand beside a worn copy of the book he used to read on weekends. There's no picture of her. Not out of bitterness, but because that's not the kind of space I want to keep her in. She lives somewhere else now. I don't know where. I don't ask. Sometimes I imagine what she tells people when they ask about me. Maybe she says I cut her off without reason. Maybe she says I was always distant. Maybe she cries, and the world comforts her, like it always has. That's fine. Her story is hers to carry, and mine is mine to protect. A few months ago, I stood by my father's grave. Not on an anniversary, not on a birthday, just a Tuesday. I brought a thermos of black coffee and sat on the grass beside him. I didn't talk much. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the quiet wrap around me like a blanket that didn't demand anything. And after a while I whispered, "You did good, Dad. You did better than you knew." Because he did. He wasn't perfect. He was scared. He was quiet. He made compromises that cost him things I'll never fully understand. But he loved me the only way he knew how, with his silence, with his savings, with his sacrifice. And I carry that with me every day. Not just the memory of what he gave me, but the responsibility to live in a way that honors it. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not something you give once and walk away. It's something you wake up and choose again every morning. It's a decision to build instead of burn, to breathe instead of brace, to soften even when the world taught you to armor up. There's a phrase I keep taped to my mirror now. I wrote it after the day she showed up at my door. It says, "You are not the worst thing done to you." Some days I believe it more than others. But most days, it reminds me that I don't have to keep living under her shadow, or anyone's. Because I am more than what she broke. And because choosing peace isn't weakness. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And I do it every day.